Today is March 5th, 2024. My name is Roxanne Evans, and I'm interviewing Mr. David Collins for the Contextualization and Commemoration Initiative. Thank you, Mr. Collins, for agreeing to this interview.
You're welcome.
It's very nice to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
This interview is being recorded, Mr. Collins, and the unedited copy will be housed here at UT. Please know that if there's anything you do not wish to discuss, I will honor your wishes. And if there are topics you wish to discuss that I've not asked about, please feel free to bring them up. And last, if we need to take a break to get a glass of water or for any other reason, just let us know.
Will do.
Okay. Well, Mr. Collins, let's begin. And I'd like you to share some of your memories and your experiences growing up in Doak Springs.
Well, that was a wonderful experience. Doak Spring is located south of Lexington, Texas on Highway 77 and also south of Old Downbox on Highway 21. There's a 4.6-mile stretch of roadway in which after the Civil War, African Americans purchased land on both sides of the roadway at the time, and they were all contiguous to each other, and it served as a security blanket for them. Plus, they had all their necessities, their farm. They had a store on Highway 21 at 3403, and then another store on the corner of Highway 77 at 3403. And it was a very secure neighborhood, and everyone knew their neighbors, and I was able to visit. I knew all the neighbors, because I traveled from one home to the other, because when some of the neighbors would cook what's called yeast bread, I could smell it, and I would always show up. And of course, they'd say, well, I know what you hear. So that was the fun part of it. And helping my grandfather on the farm and raising hogs, chicken, and a few cows and horses.
Hmm. Sounds like it was a very close-knit community.
It was, and everyone knew each other, and those that needed help. There was one gentleman named Mr. Smith, and he owned about 400 acres, and he had a nice lake on his property, and he would allow us to go fishing, all the families around. It charged us a minimal amount. Sometimes he didn't charge anything, but everybody supported each other.
That is an excellent experience growing up. Now tell me a little bit more about growing up on your grandfather's farm, the kinds of skills that you learned there and what that meant in terms of your future career choices.
Well, I'm kind of amazed about what he was able to do, because after he purchased his first tract of land in 1945, and it took him about 3 or 4 years to build it, and then once the house was built, the 3 acres was more or less self-contained. In the back of the house, he had a garden. Directly to the corner of the house, he had a smokehouse. Every fall we would slaughter animals and then process them and then cure them in the smokehouse. And then in the back, he would have a barn with a hayloft for the cows. And then, of course, next to that was a hog pen with a shed for them and a feed trough. And then next to that was a chicken pen whereby he would raise chickens. Then he would build a chicken house, and they would have a series of nests with a shelf at the top where the hens could walk and a ladder to go up. And then to the front of the house, he would have fruit trees, plum trees, and pear trees. So it was just like a self-contained business in a sense. He raised all of his necessities for survival.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, what were race relations like growing up in the Doak Springs area?
Well, oftentimes we were really sort of secluded from the town. Lexington was about 3 miles, Giddings was 15, and he would only go to town once a month to get the necessities. And of course, sometime I would travel with him. And of course, at the time, they would have black and white, colored and white water fountains. Mm-hmm. And of course, being devilish as I was, I drank out of the white fountain. And he said, "Boy, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I just want to see if it tastes different." and he told me, "You better get out of there." So it was. Hey, we had fun, but it was prevalent at the time. But we went to town, got what we needed, and then went back to the farm.
Okay, okay. Now, tell me what your schools were like growing up.
Well, Doak Spring Freedom Colony had its own school, church, and playground.
Okay.
And at the time, you know, there was segregation, and all the school teachers were African Americans, and of course the superintendent was white because you had a dual school system. Most of the freedom colonies in Texas, you know, they had their own church, school, and playground facilities, basketball court. And the school I went to was Doak Spring, and it was a story-and-a-half frame building with a hallway to the kitchen, and then in the back there was an ag building where we were taught agriculture. Dr. Govan was an ag teacher. And then to the left of the school was a basketball court, and back was the bus barn, and then the outhouse for girls and boys. So
Wow.
everything was self-contained.
Okay.
And then in the front of the school, we had a library, and that's why we went to school. And being born in March of 1941, I couldn't go to school until the following year, September. And so I started at 6 1/2. And my first day of school, I distinctly remember, you know, I had my blue jeans and short t-shirt, short shirt, tan, and no shoes. And I walked to school, about a mile.
Wow.
You know, it's, well, I didn't think anything of it. Most of the kids didn't have shoes.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Now, how would you evaluate the quality of education you got in your schools coming up?
Well, quite frankly, the African-American teachers were very dedicated, and they were concerned about us. And I recall Miss Corette Moore. She was very tough. She said, "Boy, you better sit down, you know, so you can learn something. Put your thinking cap on." But they all cared for us, and we were all family.
Now, you left that area to go to school in Houston. Tell me a little bit about your high school experience.
That happened in 1954, 55, because every year Mr. Tommy Hodge would take us down south to Woodsboro to pick cotton, and we did that over the summers every year, because, you know, school started late in the country. And in 1954, 55, I think that was my last year of going down south to Woodsboro to pick cotton. At the time, it was about $2.50 per 100 pounds. I would pull 600 pounds, make me $15, and go fishing.
Wow.
And of course, I'd come back with $75 a week for 3 or 4 weeks. And that's how I bought my school clothes over those years while I was there. But 55 was my last year, and I told Papa that I need to go to Houston to go to school, because at the time, cotton picking machines were coming in, and he was struggling on the farm. So I said, well, I need to go get an education. So I moved to Houston and went to Douglas Elementary and Jack Yates High School.
Okay.
And at Douglas Elementary, it was even then in 55 in Houston, the schools were segregated.
Yeah.
Douglas was really all black, and then I went there, and then went from there to Jack Yates Junior Senior High, and then in 59 they built a new Jack Yates High School, and then we transferred to that school it's near Texas Southern University, and it's between TSU and University of Houston, and this school was magnificent, and we had Dr. John Codwell, the principal, and most of the teachers, as I mentioned in the summary, were very, very dedicated, and you didn't mess around, and they cared about us, especially Miss Cotton. She was tough.
Now, tell me, growing up, particularly when you were in high school, what had you heard about UT Austin before you actually came here, and what was UT's reputation in the community you were in?
I had heard about it, but not much. I knew it wasn't integrated, and I knew that an architect, John S. Chase, went here, I think it's 55, 56 or so, and to get his architectural degree because I think he went to Tuskegee and they weren't accredited.
Right.
And then, of course, U of H was not, well, they were segregated also, but back to UT. And that's what I had heard about UT, and that was most of it. And I didn't learn much more about it until I started interviewing and applying to colleges.
Okay, okay. Now, growing up, were you familiar with the Heman Sweat versus Painter case that involved UT?
I only heard of it, and it was sort of before that was in 54, 55, I believe.
Yeah.
And, you know, being a 14, 15-year-old, you weren't interested in much
Right.
else but yourself at the time. But, you know, so, but I did hear of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there other civil rights cases, particularly when you were in high school, that you were aware of, either in the Houston area or statewide? Or
Well, there were several demonstrations, and I think the sit-ins were much later, I think. Yeah, but that was basically, even in Houston, during the time I was growing up, I lived in Third Ward,
Okay.
and that's a predominantly black community. And we had our own theater, Park Theater, Dowling Theater, and we had, you know, that's why we went. We were like a contained community, just like when I grew up in the country.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Fifth Ward, Fourth Ward, although Fourth Ward was a former freedom colony. It still exists, but it has been gentrified.
Okay.
Fifth Ward is still there, Third Ward is, but now it's becoming gentrified.
Yeah. Now, tell me when you actually decided to apply to UT.
Well, primarily when I started making applications, I checked with Prairie View, I checked with TSU, and they were not accredited in architecture, and that's what I've always wanted to do. And then I applied at U of H. Of course, they were not integrated. Of course, there was some graduate students. The one guy had been admitted, but undergraduate school was not integrated. So that was, and of course, I applied to West Point. Of course, I didn't get there. But UT was my other alternative, and plus, it was relatively inexpensive. Yeah.
Okay. Now, did you take an entrance exam prior to getting admitted to UT?
An interest in...
An entrance exam?
No, I didn't. I don't think, I think it was my grades, my recommendations, my letters.
Okay.
Because I had pretty good grades, B+ average.
Okay, that's
So they were kind to me and let me in.
good. Okay, excellent, excellent. Now, how did your family feel about you coming to UT?
Well, I guess one disappointing comment was by my counselor at Jack Yates. And she said, well, why are you going to UT? Why aren't you going to Prairie View? It's a black school. I said, I wanted to go to Prairie View, but in order for me to become an architect, I needed to go to an accredited college. And so I'm sorry you feel that way, but that's what I want to do. And she said, okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, how did you get to campus on your first trip here?
My last year at Jack Yates, you know, when it was built, they divided the students and built Worthing, and my mother moved to Sunnyside, so I decided I was going to stay, so I just catch the bus every morning. And then one morning I was waiting, and then Mr. J.B. DuBose, he was a Prairie View graduate, he picked me up, and they said, where you going? I said, I'm going to Jack Yates. He says, well, I'm going to TSU. Why don't you ride with me? And so he would pick me up every morning, and then in my last 8 months or so, he said, well, your mother's right down the street. Why don't you stay with me, and then we just get up every morning. We go to school. So he took me to school every morning, and then when I graduated, he dropped me off at UT.
Oh, he brought you to UT as well?
He did.
Wow.
Yeah, very nice man.
Wow.
Yeah, he lived till he was 94.
Now, what were your first impressions of UT when you arrived on campus?
Well, it was somewhat shocking, but as you're aware, right across from San Jacinto, on San Jacinto at the stadium,
Right.
that was the San Jacinto Dome. and you know the spring that goes behind it.
Mhm.
They got some kind of alumni center there now,
Yes,
I believe.
yeah.
And we were sort of secluded, and the whole dorm, we used to call it was raggedy, really, but mostly the African American students, the men stayed there. So it was a similar setting I had always lived in, and we all bonded together and just made things comfortable for each other, and we wanted to get an education, so that's what we did. We survived.
Okay. Okay. Now, did you have any expectations of how you thought things would be at UT? And
Oh, I always knew where to go and where not to go, and focus on what I was here for. And you know, we saw a few incidents, but we just ignored them and moved on. You know, you get called various names, and growing up that way, it just didn't bother me anymore. I just ignored it, you know, because getting into a fight, just one of us going to lose. So we just avoided it, and we stuck together. Like I said, we had intramural football and then track with Cleo Jenkins heading us up, and so we made life comfortable for ourselves.
yeah, excellent. Now, what do you think your professor's expectations of you were?
Well, the two professors I remember is Dr. Taniguchi and Professor Alexander. Professor Alexander taught us architectural history. And of course, I've always been interested in history, so it was a great course. And he took an interest in me. And then, of course, Dr. Taniguchi was the design professor.
Okay.
And so he knew we were there to learn, and so it was nice. I didn't have a problem. I mean, I may have had a few that in the other classes, but we just ignored that. Just did our homework and went back to our rooms, and that's about it. But no, I didn't have any major problems.
Okay. Now, tell me a little bit more about your living situation the first couple of years on campus.
Oh, it
Tell me
was
a little more about dorm life.
dorm life was pretty. I had a roommate, and you know, having to struggle to get food on the table. You know, I always made sure. Of course, I grew up in the country. I knew how to survive, so I would buy goods when I couldn't afford to go to the lunch room or the student room. I would buy cheap goods, and we had the old steam heaters, and I brought along.
The radiator heaters?
Yeah, it's radiator heaters. You remember?
Yeah.
Like looked like ribs.
Right.
And we had those, and I'd use those to cook meals.
That's pretty
And
creative.
my roommate and I, everybody, and then the guys down the hall, they come knocking on the door. I said, "Well, we don't have enough, brother." So, well, sometime I did cook enough for several people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had a part-time job in the whitest women's dorm.
Oh, that was one of the best jobs on campus. I was fortunate enough to get the job cleaning the kitchen and washing the dishes and cleaning up behind the young ladies, and that way I would get my meals.
Okay.
And so I enjoyed that, and the girls were beautiful. So I mean, that was a fun job.
Okay.
Yep. Matter of fact, that was another dorm next door. The females stayed in Whitus and Almetris, I believe.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Are those buildings still existing?
Ooh, I think they have been
A historical marker or something?
redone.
Oh, okay. I gotta go
But I
back.
know a couple of them are no longer there. One or two have been sort of, modified or rebuilt.
They should have kept one of those. It was a very historical building.
Very historic.
Yeah. And
Very
and the
much so.
girls, like I said, were all together, and they felt at home, and they were protected there.
Yeah.
And the two ladies who ran the dorm, especially Miss Almetris, she was tough.
Yeah, I heard
Yeah.
quite a bit about her.
Oh, you heard?
Heard some stories, but everybody loved her from what
Oh,
I
yeah.
understand.
She was a nice lady. Matter of fact, we gave her an honoring ceremony but a few years later.
Yes,
Yeah.
I remember hearing that.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned that you grew up swimming, so did you have to take a swimming test for physical
No,
education?
I already knew how to swim, and I took PE and I took quite a bit of PE in high school, so
Mhm.
they didn't require us to do PE. You
Okay.
know, I wasn't in athletics, so
Okay,
I didn't have to do that.
okay,
We kept ourselves busy in flag football and track.
okay.
Yeah.
Now tell me a little bit more about your classroom interactions, either with the professors or with other students.
Well, it was pretty cordial. I guess being the only one or two, maybe three, well, one or two in the classroom, and I was pretty fluent in algebra and trigonometry and what have you, and of course, and and some history also, and so and when I answer my question, everybody look at me and say, you know, so I didn't have I just did what I was supposed to do, and I was dedicated to what I was studying. Matter of fact, one of the graduate students that came to the university, Louis Fontenot, he was a structural engineer getting his degree here because he needed the accreditation too, as a structural engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and like I mentioned earlier, my math teachers at Jack Yates, they really taught us well. And so I helped him with his algebra course, which he appreciated.
Wow. Now your teams, when you work together, you mentioned team projects. Were the teams mixed?
Yes, we did design projects, and one particular one was we had to determine colors and design and make sure, because in architecture you have to design buildings with color and whatever. So we played with color, and I kept this.
Wow.
And this is the reason I kept it, because on that one I made a C. And then we worked on squares, color and squares, and then in one instance he wanted to see if we could recreate this into a drawing by hand.
Oh, wow.
And so what we did, he made us draw that on the 11 by 17 sheet, and we recreated the whole deal.
Wow. What grade did you get on that? Do you recall?
I don't remember that one, but on one of these, I think this one I got a B, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a B on a B minus on this one.
Pretty good.
And that's something I've always kept, and I'm going to frame them
Oh, yeah.
because that was a tedious course.
Those are good keepsakes.
Yep, it is.
Excellent. Now, tell me a little bit more about your friends. You mentioned playing flag football and doing different things.
You remember Cleo Jenkins? He was in our class. He was a former track star,
I've heard that name. Mm-hmm.
and he taught us the 100 relay, which I wasn't good at. And then he said, "Why don't you try the hurdles?" So I did the hurdles. I was pretty good, but I knocked many of the hurdles over. He said, "That's not good, Collins, you know." But I got the hang of it, but I think I may have come in second. But,
Okay,
but
not bad.
it was a learning experience, and that kept us busy. When we weren't studying, it kept us out of trouble and mind on doing something else.
Right.
Yes.
And it kept you connected in terms
Yes,
of,
it did.
you know, having a
Absolutely.
community.
Absolutely. And Lonnie Fogel, he was there, and several other guys. And of course, Cleo Jenkins was the fastest guy around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And let's see. Okay, you've shared quite a few names of your friends and classmates here.
Oh,
Now-
yeah, I knew all of them. And as a matter of fact, there were 3 people from Jack Yates, Matthew Malone and Stafford Johnson, who were
Okay.
here. And one other, of course, Stafford transferred, so did Larry Westbury. Larry Westbury's father was one of my teachers.
Ah,
Yeah, Matthew Malone was in architecture with me.
okay.
And of course, Willie Jordan, we got to know each other while we were here. And later in life, when he formed Hayward Jordan McCowan, and I formed PTI Incorporated, we worked together
Okay.
on several projects.
Okay. And you and Rodney Griffin.
And Rodney Griffin, yeah,
Yeah.
he was one of my buddies here, and I think he was married to, well, I won't say, I think it was Cheryl.
I think so. I've
Yeah.
heard the name Cheryl Brooks.
Yeah, he was married to her, and they separated, but he lived in Fort Bend County with me for the last 50 years, and we've been involved in politics over the years, and I see him occasionally.
Okay. Now, you mentioned flag football and athletics. What are some of the other activities you were involved in for entertainment?
Well, not very much. I told you I was in the ROTC,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, I had always wanted to go to West Point, but when I got here, I got a letter. Initially, I had written to Adam Clayton Powell,
Oh,
who was a congressman from New York,
right.
and he returned the letter, but he said he had filled his allotment, and so I came to Texas and joined ROTC, and then I got a letter saying I need to take an exam for West Point, and so I went down and took the exam. Of course, they told me I didn't pass, but I still believe today I passed, but I just let it go.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Wow.
So I didn't let that stop me.
Okay. Now, did you interact much with the larger black community here in Austin while you were a student?
Well, I visited, of course, Houston Tillerson. I had one of my prom dates who, Addie Ellisaw, who went there.
Oh,
And so I'd go visit her, and we'd talk and have a soda. And I got to know several students at Houston Tillerson from Jackie H.
mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we'd go to various Saturday evening events or parties in town.
Okay.
And that was the extent of it.
Okay.
Other than that, it wasn't much time for anything else, studying.
Studying, right. Now, were you involved with the NAACP or any other civil rights type
No,
groups?
not at the time. We didn't have time. I mean, it was kind of, I went to a couple of rallies downtown, but no. But no others.
Okay. Do you recall many of the political events going on in Texas and around the country while you were here at UT?
Yeah, I kind of followed the Lyndon Johnson era and the Kennedy. I remember I was sitting in White's for lunch. I think it was November 22nd, 1963. And the TV was on, and they announced that President Kennedy had been shot. You know, I will always remember that. You know, that's something I'll never forget. And so I ran in the kitchen and told the girls, and they screamed. And so that was one of the sad days. And so most of us took off the day from class. That was tragic.
Very tragic. Now, what were some of the spaces you felt most comfortable, most welcomed at here on the UT
The
campus?
student union was, you know, relatively an easy place to be. And of course, most of the black students sat at the same table, so we were all congregated together. So we kept each other company and kept us in our own space. And I had a few white friends, like I mentioned probably later on in the text. Robert Harold was in my architectural class. And we moved back to Houston after school, and we were in the National Guard together.
Okay. Okay. What were some of the places you felt most excluded, or maybe you felt uneasy or uncomfortable about being on campus?
Well, I never went to any of the bars or cafes.
Yeah.
I mean, that wasn't the only reason. I mean, I couldn't afford it. I mean, I didn't have any money to buy a drink, so I just knew not to go.
Now, besides ROTC, what other school organizations or activities were you involved in while you were a student
Other
here?
than those, the intramural and
Okay,
the football and track
okay.
and classroom. That's it.
That sounds like a full schedule right there. Now, tell me a little bit about how you think your career path was improved by having a degree from UT Austin.
Well, I didn't get a degree. Well, you know, in 1964, I ran out of money. I had finished 2.5 years, and so I had to transfer to University of Houston.
They were integrated by that
They
time.
were integrated by that
Yeah.
time, yes, absolutely. And so I enrolled, and since I was in my 4, 5, and 6 hour, back then when you were a junior or senior, the architectural courses were 6 hours. They were design charrettes, and so 5 hours sometimes, and 3 hours. And so I applied to U of H and to the architectural school, and they said, well, most of our classes are in the daytime. So I changed my majors to civil engineering.
Okay.
And went to night school. I worked part-time and took off at 3 and then graduated from the University of Houston at night school in civil engineering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Never looked back.
Never looked back. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about more of your career highlights as what you've accomplished.
I began my career developing subdivisions for local land developers. It's what's called municipal utility districts, where they create a subdivision.
Oh, MUDs.
MUDs, yes.
Yeah.
They're a political subdivision. And
Mm-hmm.
so I began my career developing water districts, PUDs and WCIDs,
Okay.
water improvement districts.
Mm-hmm.
And I developed about 5 or 10 subdivisions between 1971 through 75.
And they were a fairly new entity back then.
Oh yeah. That's when it came to being, and developers used it as a tool to create an entity as a political subdivision. They deed 5 lots to 5 or 6 guys, 5 guys, and they built a trailer. They didn't really live there, but then they ran the district, created a MUD, had a bond issue, sold the bonds, and developed a subdivision. Matter of fact, I live in a MUD that was created back then.
Okay.
And then, of course, in 1975, I transitioned to Cardell, Rowlett, and Scott, CRS, and began to develop projects in the Middle East. And I developed 3 or 4 major universities, one being the University of Riyadh, the Internal Security Forces College, Jeddah Maritime Academy, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Staff Housing. And we did that over a 5-year period. At the time, from 75 to 1980, Saudi Arabia had a $5 billion infrastructure improvement plan. And so I got an opportunity to travel to the Middle East. And I don't know whether you remember Sheikh Hassan Yamani. He was the Minister of Petroleum and Minerals, and I met his son. And every time we had a contract in the Middle East, we had to train one of the Saudi students who were engineers. And they would come over, and we'd work with them for a year. And so that was a great experience developing the university. University of Riyadh, when we first bid it, it was about $7.5 billion. And then they had to cut the budget, so it finally came in at $3.5 billion. And the old Postmaster General was one of the contractors. I can't recall his name now, but it'll come to me. But he was one of the contractors out of Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
But then the next project was the University of Maiduguri in Nigeria. That was an additional project I did.
Okay.
And then, of course, in 1982, I went into business. I met a young man from Ohio, Milton Kendricks, and he wanted me to establish a Houston office. So I developed the necessary business plan, and we developed the office, and we're still in business. It's a different name, but I developed projects across the country and all over Houston. We did major light rail systems in Dallas and Atlanta, MARTA, and WMATA in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And in 2000, Mayor Brown appointed me owner's representative to develop the Toyota Center. And so I managed the construction of the Toyota Center.
Wow, Mayor Lee Brown?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
He was a great champion of small business,
Mhm.
and I'll never forget him. He gave a lot of work to African American businesses.
That's
You know,
amazing.
he was the former police chief of Atlanta.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's quite a history. Now, Mr. Collins, you said you periodically come back to the university or have over the years. How do you think conditions have changed for current African American students compared to when you were here on campus?
Well, I see many more African Americans, but it's just so many students, and the campus itself, I mean, it exploded. You know, I was walking down San Jacinto looking for the old San Jacinto dorm, and and I realized where it was, and then there's a alumni building there, and I said, wow, it's really changed. But at least they couldn't move the stream. The creek is still there.
Still there.
Yeah. It's pure running water coming through there. That's where I used to fish.
Oh.
You know, back then I'd catch fish and we'd clean them and fry them.
Wow.
Being a country boy, I knew how to.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So do you think conditions for African American students maybe are easier than they might have been when you were here, or do you think it's just different?
It probably is. I haven't heard much controversy over the years. I mean, there was a few problems, but when they had the shooting, you know, in the tower.
Tower shooting.
And that was a sad day, you know. That's another moment I'll always remember.
Yeah. And you were on campus?
I don't think so. I think that happened in, I forget the year. I can't recall. But I
No,
think
it would have been after you left.
it was after I was gone.
Yeah.
Yes, it was
'Cause
after
I think
was.
that was in the 70s. if
Yes,
I
it
recall.
was.
Okay.
And but that sort of changed
Yeah.
the campus.
Yeah.
Yep. Security became much more stricter. And today, I mean, there's so many students, and so it's kind of difficult because everybody sees you. So you have to be careful what you do.
That's true. That's true.
And of course, walking around campus, I get lost because it's just totally changed.
It has indeed. I see old pictures and I get disoriented trying to figure out where the buildings were.
Right.
So it's changed quite a bit.
Because the old Breckenridge Dome, I guess they tore that down. Yeah, so, and San Jacinto is gone.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, Mr. Collins, is there anything that I didn't ask you about or anything else you'd like to share?
No, after college and then during my mid-career, I got interested in developing my family history, and because I felt it was important for my kids and future generations know about the struggle of African Americans and how they made it. Because as you're aware, after the Civil War, there were over 500 freedom colonies. Most of the African Americans moved to backwoods areas and made a home for themselves and developed a community. And most of those communities are still in existence. And so my grandfather, when he was living, I used to listen to him, and I remember all the stories he told me. You know, he was a great historian. He only had a third grade education, but he really knew his surroundings. And growing up in Ledbetter and having to be a sharecropper or a tenant farmer, and sometime he could finish up his year farming and take his cotton to the Ledbetter Gin. You know, back then, in all the freedom colonies, there were merchandising stores who would give African Americans credit,
Okay.
and they'd keep a ledger of everything they bought by the penny, and flour, sugar, the whole bit. And then at the end of the planting season, when he sold his goods, one year he may have $20 left over. The next year, he may be $20 in the hole.
Yeah.
So I decided to do my research, and I've driven all over Fayette County and Lee County and developed that history. The book I gave you, Images of America, Round Top African Americans. And it took a while to get it, but I finally finished it. Now I'm working on another one
Awesome. Excellent.
and developing 2 African-American museums, one in Bastrop and one in Round Top.
Okay, well, I will look forward to both of those.
Absolutely, and you read this, and if you got any comments, it's a good history.
Okay,
Thanks to my grandfather.
okay, well, I'm definitely going to read that.
Yes.
Well, I thank you so much, Mr. Collins, for your time and for sharing your story here at UT.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and it's always good to come back and see the campus. But I have to search my way around. But it's a great place to be.
Yes, it is.
And I'm thankful that they did allow African Americans to come and get a good education.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you so much.
Thank you.